Hi artists, so today I'm going to be showing you a few different techniques for watercolor painting. Some of the techniques are ones that I'm going to use in my actual painting. Some of the techniques I'm just going to show you guys on a separate sheet of paper because it's not really a technique that I want to use in my painting specifically, but it might be something that you wanted to use in your painting. So I'm going to start with my watercolor painting of the beach with the sand. So if you remember, I showed you guys my reference photo of the beach with the Mickey Mouse carved into the sand. So that's what I used to sketch in. And again, I sketched really lightly. I'm actually going to go back in with an eraser a little bit and actually even lightly erase some of my lines from my Mickey Mouse before I get started with my sand today. Just so that I have even lighter lines. The reason I'm doing this is because when you watercolor paint, it seals in the pencil marks on your paper, so you're not going to be able to erase anything once you watercolor paint over it. So you want it to be really, really light so that those pencil lines aren't showing through in your painting. Okay, so that's a little bit better. So then from there, what I'm going to do, which you guys don't have to do, but I'm using artist's tape. It's a tape that's a little less sticky than like a masking tape. If you do have masking tape and that's all you have and you want to use some, what you can do is you can stick it actually on your clothes and then peel it off, and it'll make it a little less sticky so that when you do peel it off the paper, it won't rip the paper. So I'm going to tape the line right where my sand meets the water just for right now, so that I can kind of secure that spot from being painted on, because I don't want to have brown where I'm going to paint blue. It'll really muddy up the blue, and I'm just kind of smoothing over to the tape to make sure there's no air bubbles so that it's flat. So I have my cup of water and my watercolor paints and I'm going to get started. So the first technique that I'm going to show you is me painting in the sand. So I'm actually going to set my water cup on screen so you guys can see. So I actually only dip into the water just a teeny bit, and I am going to start out with some brown. You can see that it's not really flooded on here, so it's just very light. So I'm going to go in, and I kind of have to do this a little quickly because I want to do it before the watercolor paint dries. And I'm also going to go in with some yellow as well. And once I start getting this in, and it's still pretty wet, because again, I want to have this pretty wet for the technique that I'm about to do, I am going to use kitchen salt. So just regular iodized salt. And what this will do is the salt reacts with the water, and it creates this really cool effect that I want my sand to look like. I don't want my sand to look perfectly smooth because sand isn't perfectly smooth. So I've just got regular iodized kitchen salt. You don't need a lot. I'll show you how much I'm going to put on. So it's just a teeny bit. I'm not even going to put that much on, and I'm just going to sprinkle it. And again, your watercolor paint, you want it wet when you do this. If your watercolor paint's dry, then the salt has nothing to react with. So I'm going to start by putting the salt onto here while that's still wet. And then I'm going to work my way down. I actually have too much salt. I'm going to pour some back into my container here. And I'm going to go back in and keep painting this, and I will be back in a minute. Hi artists, I'm back. So I would say it's been about 10 to 15 minutes that I've really waited for the salt on my watercolor painting to dry before I scrape it off. If it's wet, it kind of gets gooky and it doesn't give you the effect that you're looking for. So I'm going to very carefully unpeel my painter's tape here. And I'm going to, as you can see, hold the paper right near where I'm pulling. If you are removing tape from here, so I'm going to move that water before I spill it. And this will help aid the tape in not ripping your paper. So, all right. So you can see I got a nice clean line there with the tape. I am going to go take this to the garbage bin now to scrape the salt off, and I will be right back. Hi artists, so you can see I shook the salt off into the garbage can, and you can see a little bit on here, the speckles from the salt in the way that it reacted. I'm pretty happy with how the way my sand turned out. So the next part that I'm going to go to in my reference photo, I've decided is I'm going to work on the sky next. Even though it's a light blue in this picture, that's not what I want. I want to do a sunset type look. So what I am going to do is I'm going to actually turn my paper upside down so that I have better access to it, so that I'm not trying to reach over top the sand and then have the opportunity of dripping water or colored watercolor paint onto it. I am going to take my eraser and erase a little bit on the trees here again. Now I have a bit more of a wavy line where the island is here, so I'm not going to use tape this time. I'm just going to have to be pretty in control of my brush to the best of my ability. So this technique that I'm going to use is called wet on wet. So what that is you actually get your paper wet first, and then you watercolor paint on top of the water that's there. So I'm going to get my paper wet where I would like to paint the watercolor in. And you want to make sure it's pretty saturated. It shouldn't be overflowing off your paper, but still pretty wet. The reason being is you guys probably have noticed that your watercolor paper has a texture to it, unlike our drawing paper. And that's because that enables it to soak the water in better. And that's what makes the watercolor painting look nice. And it's what makes it so that your paper doesn't curl up the way that it would if you were using regular paper. So I am going to start with red at the bottom of my sunset here. And you can kind of see the way the paint is just spreading. And I'm going to go in with a little bit of orange next. Now, if you guys want to do a sunset, you don't have to use the wet on wet technique. This is just an idea. You could use the wet on wet technique really for anything. It's not like it's only for sunsets by any means. That's just the way I decided to use it in my work. I kind of wanted the way the colors are what we call bleeding together, spreading together. I'm going to go in with a little bit of yellow. And again, my paper's pretty wet. It's not dripping off. And you can also, well, I guess you can't see, but my other hand is right here holding the corner of my paper, giving me a little bit more of control of it as I am adding in my sunset here. And you can see that I'm not really painting in a perfectly straight line. I'm kind of going all over the place. The more water you have on your brush, the lighter these colors are going to be. The less water you have, the darker they're going to be. So it really all depends on the look that you as the artist are going for in this process. I go in with a little bit of blue up here. I think that's a little dark, so I'm going to go in here with just water and not more paint. Okay, so since this is pretty saturated with water, I do really like the way that this turned out, but I want to add a little bit of texture as if there's kind of like clouds or things like that. So I'm now going to use a different technique, which you use a paper towel for. So I'm going to kind of crumple it up actually, and then I'm going to kind of go in and just tap into here, and this is going to create the look of some clouds in my sky without actually painting white in here. So you can kind of see the way that they are turning out. And I'm just doing this very lightly. I'm not pressing too hard. And the reason being is I don't want to soak up all of the wet on wet that I did there. So I'm pretty happy with the way that looks right now. So I will be back in a few minutes while I let that dry. Hi everyone, so my watercolor for my sky is pretty much dry now. So I am actually going to start on the water line next. So for this, what I'm going to do is I'm going to mix a little bit of blues with some purples actually, just to give it a little bit more depth. I kind of really like overlaying and mixing watercolor paints, especially when we're using these Crayola sets, just because the colors are so basic that when you mix some together, I think it makes it look a little bit more interesting. So I'm just, again, following that line for my islands here. And I'm going to paint right up to my sand line. I could have taped this, but I'm just going to go really slow. From here, because I want my water to be textured, I don't want it to be smooth. It's not really smooth in the photo either. Adding a bit of water to my colors that I've mixed here. And then I have a sheet of saran wrap. I'm going to put that right on top of my water. I'm going to kind of sprinkle it on purpose. Lay it in there. And I want to kind of press it down to make sure that it's doing what it should. You can kind of see it's not really doing anything over here in this spot, so I'm going to add a little bit more paint there. There we go. All right. And then I am going to let that dry. I know, so many steps. And I will be back in a bit. There it is. So I waited about 10-15 minutes and I pulled my saran wrap off. The paint was still a little bit damp underneath it, so I gave it a few more minutes to dry. So you can see it turned out pretty textured over here. I did get a little bit of spill essentially going up there and a little bit of blobbing here in my sand, but overall I'm pretty happy with it. So now what I'm going to do is I am going to work on painting in the island from my reference photo. So I have kind of like a little one over here, and then my green screen's making this one a little invisible, but the one over here. So I'm gonna paint that in with just a basic brown for the bottom. And I'm hoping if I go a little bit darker with this, and I do that by putting in less water, that it will cover up some of that blue that blobbed a bit. And you can see I'm going nice and slow. I don't always drag the paintbrush the entire way, just to give me a little bit more control with it. And then I have some palm trees over in this area over here in my painting. So I am literally just dipping my brush back into the paint here. I'm not even dipping it into the water for this part. So I'm going to draw just a few little lines back here. Just kind of flicking the brush up a little bit, and I'm not pressing very hard because I don't want it to smear essentially. All right, so I think I'm going to leave that there like that. And then again, another drying process. So I'll be back in a little bit once this part is dry to show you the next technique. There it is. So I am on my last two steps now. So the first one is going to be doing the green on my trees. So you can see I've kind of blobbed in a little bit of green paint up here. I don't want to do too much because I don't want my trees to look too big. And then I'm going to take a bendy straw and blow around a little bit. So here we go. All right. All right, I think I'm gonna take my brush and just touch up a little bit right in here and connect those. And there we go. So I'm pretty happy with how that turned out. It's a little organic, which means like moves on its own, kind of free flow. And then down here at the bottom in my sand, I am just going to paint in my Mickey Mouse. I kind of lost that shape when I did the salt. So I'm just gonna kind of free draw it back in here. When I'm drawing the Mickey a little smushed so that it looks flat, it shouldn't be like a perfect circle. It should be more like an oval if somebody is standing over it. And then like I did on the clouds up at the top, I am going to take a paper towel and just kind of go in here and dab, because I don't want it to look like a perfect line, especially being that it's in the sand. All right. And that's it. So here is my final product for my watercolor painting. I've got the beach with the island in the background with my Mickey Mouse in the sand. So I hope you guys had fun and you take some of these techniques and use them and have fun. I'll talk to you later. Bye, artists.